Dora Johnson stood at the edge of her schoolyard, her heart beating in rhythm with the distant sounds of laughter and chatter. The sun cast a warm glow over the bustling neighborhood of Atlanta, but the brightness of the day felt dimmer in her mind. At 13 years old, she was a bright and ambitious girl, dreaming of a life filled with possibilities. Yet, each day brought with it the weight of financial struggles that her family faced, making her aspirations seem like distant stars just out of reach. "Mom, I really want to go on the school trip to Washington, D.C., Dora pleaded, her eyes wide with hope as she sat at the kitchen table later that evening. The smell of her mother's famous fried chicken filled the air, but it did little to lighten the mood hanging over them. Her mother, a woman of resilience, looked up from the stove, her face etched with worry. "Honey, I know how much this trip means to you, but we just can't afford it right now. Your little brother needs new shoes for school and—" "I get it, Mom," Dora interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. She slumped back in her chair, feeling the familiar pang of disappointment. The trip was a chance to see monuments, to learn about history firsthand, to dream bigger than the confines of her neighborhood. But her dreams often felt like fragile bubbles, easily burst by the harsh realities of life. The following day, as Dora walked home from school, her mind was a whirlpool of thoughts. Her mother's words echoed in her ears, mixing with the laughter of her classmates who were already talking excitedly about the trip. She kicked a pebble along the sidewalk, her gaze fixed on the ground when something caught her eye, a small, shiny object glinting in the sunlight. Curiosity piqued, she bent down and picked up a leather wallet. It was worn but elegant, adorned with gold accents that hinted at its owner's wealth. Dora's heart raced as she opened it, revealing stacks of cash and various cards. The name on one of the cards struck her like a bolt of lightning, Mrs. Thompson. The name belonged to the elderly woman who lived in the mansion at the end of her street, famous for her generosity but also her affluence. "What do I do now?" she murmured to herself, weighing the wallet in her hands. The temptation was palpable. The money inside could easily fund her trip, and more. She imagined herself standing before the Lincoln Memorial, the wind whipping through her hair, her heart swelling with pride. Yet, another voice echoed in her mind, her mother's teachings about honesty and integrity. Dora sighed, closing her eyes for a moment. "It's not mine," she whispered, the words feeling heavy yet liberating. "I can't keep it." Conflicted, she continued her walk home, the wallet tucked securely under her arm. The internal battle raged on. She wanted to do the right thing, but the allure of the cash was like a siren's call, luring her into the depths of temptation. "What if I just took a little?" she thought, the rationalization creeping in like an unwelcome guest. But deep down, her conscience screamed against it. As she reached her front porch, she took a deep breath, letting the evening air fill her lungs. "I'll return it," she decided firmly, feeling a sense of moral duty swell within her. The wallet was a part of someone else's life, a tangible piece of their story, and taking it would mean stealing a chapter from that story. With newfound resolve, Dora stepped inside her home, ready to confront her own feelings of temptation head-on. Little did she know, this decision would set into motion a series of events that would change her life forever, leading her into an unexpected adventure. The world outside was filled with opportunity, and as she clutched the wallet tightly, she felt the stirrings of a journey that was just beginning. Dora stood in front of the imposing mansion, her heart racing with a mix of excitement and anxiety. The grandeur of Mrs. Thompson's house was overwhelming, with its tall columns and manicured gardens, a stark contrast to her own modest home. She took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and approached the front door, her mind racing with thoughts of what she might say. After a moment, the door swung open, revealing a kindly housekeeper with a warm smile. "Good afternoon, dear. How can I help you?" the housekeeper asked, her voice soothing. Dora fidgeted with the wallet in her hands, feeling the weight of her decision. I found this wallet outside a store. I believe it belongs to Mrs. Thompson." Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. The housekeeper's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, how thoughtful of you. Please, come in." She stepped aside, allowing Dora to enter. The interior of the mansion was just as lavish as the exterior, with elegant furniture and beautiful artwork adorning the walls. Dora followed the housekeeper through the grand hallway, her nerves causing her stomach to twist. They arrived at a cozy sitting room where Mrs. Thompson sat in an armchair, her silver hair glinting in the sunlight streaming through the window. The elderly woman looked up, her expression shifting from surprise to delight. "Ah, you must be the young lady who found my wallet," Mrs. Thompson exclaimed, her voice filled with warmth. "Thank you so much for returning it to me." Dora felt a rush of relief as she stepped forward, handing over the wallet. "I found it outside a boutique. I just thought it was the right thing to do." Mrs. Thompson opened the wallet and began to check its contents, counting bills and smiling at the photos tucked inside. "Everything seems to be in order, thank goodness. You have no idea how much this means to me. I was worried I'd lost it forever." "I'm just glad I could help," Dora said, her cheeks flushing. "I really didn't want to keep it." Mrs. Thompson leaned forward, looking intently at Dora. "You have a good heart, my dear. It's rare to find such integrity in young people these days. I insist on rewarding you for your honesty. It's only right." Dora's heart sank at the mention of a reward. She thought of the school trip, the money that could change everything for her, but she shook her head firmly. "No, Mrs. Thompson, I can't accept anything. Doing the right thing is its own reward." The elderly woman studied Dora for a moment, a hint of admiration in her eyes. "You remind me of myself when I was your age. So determined and principled. I respect your decision, but please allow me to express my gratitude. There must be something I can do for you." Dora smiled shyly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Just knowing you have your wallet back is enough for me. Thank you for being so kind." Mrs. Thompson chuckled softly. "Kindness should always be returned, my dear. If you change your mind, my door is always open." As Dora left the mansion, her heart swelled with a mixture of happiness and confusion. She couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was more than just a simple act of returning a lost wallet. It felt like a turning point in her life, a moment that would stay with her forever. The next morning, however, Dora's world flipped upside down. She had just finished breakfast when there was a knock on the door. Her mother answered, and Dora's heart dropped as she saw two police officers standing on the porch. "Dora, we need to speak with you," one of the officers said, his tone serious. "We've been informed about the wallet you returned to Mrs. Thompson." Dora's mind raced. What could they want? Did they think she had stolen it? Panic tightened her chest, and she struggled to find her voice. "I just returned it. I didn't steal anything." The other officer raised a hand, trying to calm her. "We believe you, Dora. Mrs. Thompson called us. She wanted to ensure your honesty was recognized." Dora's heart sank further. Recognized? But why are you here then? The first officer exchanged a glance with his partner. "Mrs. Thompson wishes to speak to you. She was very impressed by your integrity. We're here to escort you to her." Dora felt a whirlwind of emotions. Relief washed over her, but confusion lingered. She hadn't anticipated this turn of events, and her heart raced as she tried to process what it all meant. Dora stood in her living room, her heart racing as she faced the two police officers standing at her door. They were tall and authoritative, their uniforms crisp and their expressions serious. Yet, there was a hint of kindness in their eyes that made Dora feel a little less afraid. The older officer, with graying hair and a gentle demeanor, stepped forward. "Good afternoon, Dora," he said, his voice calm. "We're here because Mrs. Thompson would like to speak with you. She's very grateful for what you did." Dora blinked, a wave of relief washing over her. "Grateful? But I thought maybe I'd get in trouble," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. The thought of being accused of wrongdoing had haunted her since she returned the wallet, but now it seemed her fears were unfounded. The younger officer, who stood slightly behind the elder, smiled reassuringly. No, you did the right thing. Mrs. Thompson was so touched by your honesty that she wants to personally thank you. Can you come with us?" Dora's mind raced as she processed their words. She could hardly believe it. The last thing she expected was a visit from the police leading to a meeting with Mrs. Thompson. After a quick glance at her mother, who stood in the doorway with an expression of worry mixed with pride, Dora nodded. Okay, I'll go, she replied, her voice steadier now. The officers led her outside, where a police car waited at the curb. Dora felt a flutter of nerves in her stomach as she climbed into the back seat, but she also felt a surge of hope. Perhaps returning the wallet was the right choice after all. When they arrived at Mrs. Thompson's mansion, Dora's breath caught in her throat. The grand house loomed before her, adorned with lush gardens and elegant sculptures. It felt surreal to be stepping into the world of someone so wealthy. The officers escorted her inside, and Dora was greeted by the familiar face of the housekeeper. "Ah, Dora, Mrs. Thompson is waiting in the parlor," the housekeeper said warmly, leading them through the lavishly decorated halls. Each room was filled with antiques and art, a stark contrast to Dora's modest home. As they approached the parlor, her heart raced with anticipation. Mrs. Thompson sat in a plush armchair, her silver hair framing her face beautifully. She looked up, and her eyes twinkled with warmth as she spotted Dora. "My dear, you've come. Thank you so much for returning my wallet," she said, her voice rich with gratitude. "It means more to me than you can imagine." Dora felt a blush creep to her cheeks. I just did what I thought was right," she replied shyly, her eyes downcast. "I didn't want to keep it. It belonged to you." Mrs. Thompson smiled, and there was a spark of something in her eyes, an understanding that transcended their differences. "Honesty is a rare gem, Dora. I want you to know that your integrity has inspired me." She paused, and Dora could see the emotion in her gaze. "I'd like to offer you something in return." "What do you mean?" Dora asked, her curiosity piqued. Mrs. Thompson leaned forward, her expression earnest. "I would like to fund your school trip to Washington, D.C. You deserve to see the world and to chase your dreams. Your honesty has reminded me of the importance of giving back." Dora's heart swelled, a mixture of disbelief and joy flooding her senses. "Are you sure? I mean, I didn't do it for a reward," she murmured, overwhelmed by the offer. "I'm absolutely sure," Mrs. Thompson insisted, her voice firm yet kind. "You have a heart of gold, Dora. I want you to experience this opportunity, and I hope you'll let me help you." In that moment, Dora felt a shift within herself. The weight of her financial worries lifted slightly, replaced by a burgeoning sense of possibility. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. This means so much to me," she replied, her voice filled with earnest gratitude. As they talked further, Mrs. Thompson shared stories of her own youth, of dreams that had been deferred, and the importance of nurturing the next generation. Dora listened intently, captivated by the wisdom and warmth radiating from the elderly woman. Their conversation flowed easily, bridging the gap between their lives in a way Dora had never expected. When the visit came to an end, Dora left Mrs. Thompson's mansion with a scholarship and a sense of purpose she had never known before. The police officers escorted her back home, and her heart danced with excitement. She couldn't wait to share the news with her family, to tell them that her honesty had opened doors she never imagined possible. As she walked through the door of her house, she breathed deeply, ready to embrace the future that awaited her. Dora sat at the kitchen table, her mother's face radiating a mix of pride and concern as she recounted the news about the scholarship. The aroma of dinner, smoked chicken and sweet potatoes, filled the air, but Dora's mind was elsewhere, swirling with thoughts of the unexpected turn her life had taken. "Dora, this is incredible," her mother exclaimed, her voice tinged with disbelief. "You're going to Washington, D.C." She leaned closer, her eyes narrowing slightly. "But do you think it's wise to get involved with Mrs. Thompson like that? I mean, the police." Dora bit her lip, pondering her mother's words. "I know it sounds strange, Mom, but she just wanted to thank me for returning her wallet." She said it inspired her. Dora's fingers traced the edge of the table as she recalled Mrs. Thompson's warm smile and the way her eyes sparkled with sincerity. Her mother sighed, her brow furrowed in thought. "It's wonderful that she wants to help you, but you have to remember that people can have different motives. Just because she's wealthy doesn't mean she doesn't have her own struggles." "I get that, Mom," Dora replied, her voice soft but steady. "But maybe that's the point. She's not just a rich lady. She's a person, too. I want to know more about her life, what she's been through." Her mother nodded slowly, seemingly reassured by Dora's resolve. Just be careful, sweetheart. It's easy to get caught up in the glitz and glamour. Always stay true to yourself, no matter how tempting it might be. Dora smiled, grateful for her mother's wisdom. I promise I will. I just want to make the most of this opportunity. As the conversation shifted back to the scholarship, Dora felt a surge of excitement. The trip to DC was not just a school excursion. It was a chance to step into a world beyond her own, a world filled with possibilities and opportunities. She envisioned herself standing in front of the White House, surrounded by classmates, learning about the history and culture that shaped her country. That night, as she lay in bed, Dora's mind raced with thoughts of Mrs. Thompson. She couldn't shake the feeling that the elderly woman's life held a treasure trove of stories, waiting to be uncovered. With a twinge of curiosity, she decided she would learn everything she could about Mrs. Thompson before the trip. The next day, Dora dug into her research. She discovered that Mrs. Thompson had not always lived a life of luxury. In fact, she had grown up in a modest neighborhood, facing challenges that resonated with Dora's own experiences. Articles and interviews revealed a woman who had fought against societal norms, a woman who had lost loved ones and faced discrimination. As Dora read, she felt a connection growing between them, an understanding of resilience and determination. Later that afternoon, just as she was finishing her homework, Dora's phone buzzed. It was a call from an unknown number. Hesitant but curious, she answered. Dora? Is this Dora? The voice on the other end was warm and inviting, instantly recognizable. Yes, Mrs. Thompson. Hi, Dora exclaimed, her heart racing with excitement. I hope I'm not interrupting. I wanted to thank you again for your honesty. Would you like to join me for dinner tomorrow evening? Dora's stomach flipped with nerves and exhilaration. Dinner? I'd love that. Wonderful. I'll have my driver pick you up at 6. We'll have a lovely evening, Mrs. Thompson said, her tone filled with kindness. Thank you. I can't wait. Dora replied, her voice bubbling with enthusiasm. As she hung up the phone, she felt a flurry of emotions, nervousness, excitement, and a hint of apprehension. The prospect of dining with someone so esteemed was daunting, but Dora was determined to embrace the opportunity. She spent the rest of the evening deciding what to wear, rummaging through her closet for the perfect outfit. After trying on several combinations, she settled on a simple but elegant dress that her mother had bought for her last birthday. It made her feel confident, a small but important boost as she prepared for the next day. The night before the dinner, as she lay in bed, Dora's mind wandered to the conversation she hoped to have with Mrs. Thompson. She wanted to ask about her life, her struggles, and the lessons she had learned along the way. She was eager to delve deeper, beyond the surface of wealth and status, to understand the woman who had touched her life so profoundly. As she drifted off to sleep, Dora felt an overwhelming sense of anticipation. She was on the brink of an adventure that promised to change her life, but more importantly, she was about to forge a new connection, one that could lead to understanding, growth, and perhaps a friendship that neither of them had expected. The evening air was filled with a soft warmth as Dora arrived at Mrs. Thompson's elegant home, the golden lights illuminating the grand entryway. She felt a flutter of nerves in her stomach. This was not just any dinner invitation, but a chance to connect with the woman whose life had intertwined with her own in such an unexpected way. As she stepped inside, the sweet aroma of baked chicken and roasted vegetables enveloped her, instantly calming her racing heart. Welcome, dear, Mrs. Thompson exclaimed, her voice rich with warmth as she appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a colorful dish towel. Her silver hair glinted under the soft light, and her smile was as bright as ever. I'm so glad you could make it. Thank you for inviting me, Mrs. Thompson, Dora replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She felt a rush of gratitude and excitement. As they settled at the dining table, adorned with fine china and fresh flowers, Mrs. Thompson began to serve the meal. I hope you like chicken. It's one of my favorites. I can't believe we're finally getting a chance to sit down and talk. I want to hear all about you. Dora took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. I've never had dinner in a place like this before, she admitted, glancing around at the lavish surroundings. It's beautiful. Mrs. Thompson chuckled softly. Beauty comes in many forms, my dear. But tonight is about you. Tell me about your dreams, Dora. With every bite of the delicious meal, Dora felt more at ease. Well, I really want to go to a great high school and maybe even college one day, she began, her excitement bubbling to the surface. I love science and math. I want to be an engineer or maybe even a scientist. An engineer? How wonderful. Mrs. Thompson's eyes sparkled with admiration. But tell me, what challenges do you face? Dora hesitated, but then decided to open up. My family struggles financially. Sometimes it feels like my dreams are just too far away. I worry I won't be able to afford good schools or college. Mrs. Thompson leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. You know, my childhood was not so different. I grew up in a modest neighborhood, and I had dreams that seemed out of reach. But I learned that perseverance and kindness can open more doors than money ever could. Dora listened, captivated. What did you dream of? She asked, her curiosity piqued. I wanted to be a painter, Mrs. Thompson confessed, a wistful smile gracing her lips. But life took me in another direction. I ended up in business, and while I found success, I often look back and wonder what would have happened if I had followed my heart. I can't imagine you as anything but successful, Dora said, her admiration evident. You've done so much for the community. Mrs. Thompson waved her hand dismissively, though her eyes shone with pride. All I've done pales in comparison to the potential you have. Your honesty and integrity inspire me, Dora. I want to support you in your journey. Dora's heart swelled with gratitude. You've already helped me so much. As dinner drew to a close, Mrs. Thompson's expression turned serious. Dora, I have a proposal for you. Would you consider interning at my charity organization over the summer? It would give you a chance to gain experience and contribute to something meaningful. Dora's eyes widened in disbelief. Really? You mean it? Absolutely, Mrs. Thompson replied, her smile returning. You have so much potential, and I want to help you harness it. Plus, I think you'll enjoy the work we do. I would love that, Dora exclaimed, her voice filled with enthusiasm. Thank you so much. Mrs. Thompson leaned back in her chair, a satisfied smile on her face. You deserve every opportunity that comes your way. Remember, it's not just about what you achieve, but how you can uplift others along the way. As the evening came to a close, Dora felt a sense of connection with Mrs. Thompson that transcended their age difference. They shared stories, laughter, and dreams, bridging the gap between generations. It was a night of revelations, not just about their lives, but about the power of kindness, mentorship, and the importance of following one's heart. Dora left the mansion feeling lighter, her heart filled with hope and determination. She had discovered not only a mentor but a friend in Mrs. Thompson, and she knew this was just the beginning of a beautiful journey ahead. As Dora stood at the threshold of her home, her heart raced with a mix of excitement and apprehension. She was set to leave for the school trip, a milestone she had dreamed of for so long. But just as she grabbed her backpack, the phone rang. The shrill sound cut through the air, and her mother's voice echoed from the other room, urgent and worried. Dora, it's Mrs. Thompson. Something's happened. You need to get to the hospital. It's serious, her mother called out, her voice trembling slightly. Dora felt her stomach drop. Panic surged through her veins as she thought of the elderly woman who had become such an important part of her life in such a short time. Without a second thought, she rushed out of the door, her heart pounding as she sprinted down the street. The world outside blurred as her mind raced with thoughts of Mrs. Thompson. Was she okay? What could have happened? Upon arriving at the hospital, Dora found herself in an unfamiliar, sterile environment filled with the scent of antiseptic and the sounds of distant beeping machines. She approached the reception desk, breathless. I'm here to see Mrs. Thompson. I heard she was admitted. The receptionist offered a kind smile, pointing her in the right direction. Room 204, dear. She's recovering, but you should hurry. Dora hurried down the corridor, her heart racing as she approached the door. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. The sight of Mrs. Thompson lying in the hospital bed took her breath away. The elderly woman looked fragile, her usual vibrant spirit dimmed by the 4 drip and monitors surrounding her. Dora, Mrs. Thompson exclaimed, her voice slightly hoarse but filled with warmth. You came. Dora rushed to her side, tears welling in her eyes. I was so worried. What happened? Mrs. Thompson smiled gently, her eyes shining with gratitude. Just a little scare, my dear. The doctors say I'm going to be just fine. But seeing you here, it brings me so much joy. Dora took her hand, feeling the warmth of Mrs. Thompson's grip, a comfort in the sterile surroundings. I'm so glad. You mean so much to me. I was excited about the trip, but I couldn't think about anything else when I heard you were in here. Mrs. Thompson's expression softened. You are a special girl, Dora. You have a heart of gold. I want you to know how much I appreciate you returning my wallet. Your honesty has inspired me to rethink my life and my legacy. Dora furrowed her brow, confusion mingling with concern. What do you mean? With a deep breath, Mrs. Thompson continued, I've decided to update my will. I want you to know that I've included you as a beneficiary of my estate. You remind me of the granddaughter I never had. You deserve every opportunity to pursue your dreams. Dora's heart swelled at the words, but she shook her head, overwhelmed. Mrs. Thompson, that's not necessary. I just wanted to do the right thing. I didn't expect anything in return. The elderly woman squeezed her hand tighter, her gaze unwavering. That's precisely why I admire you so much. You embody the values of kindness and integrity. It's time for me to give back, especially to someone who understands what truly matters in life. Tears streamed down Dora's cheeks as she absorbed the enormity of Mrs. Thompson's words. I can't believe this. You've changed my life already, and now this? Mrs. Thompson nodded, her voice softening. Yes, my dear. You have a bright future ahead of you, and I want to help you reach it. In that moment, Dora realized that true wealth was not measured in money or possessions, but in the bonds we create and the love we share. She leaned down, wrapping her arms around Mrs. Thompson in a tearful embrace. Thank you for believing in me, she whispered. As they held each other tight, both women felt an unbreakable connection forming, a bond that would last a lifetime. Dora's journey had led her to not only her dreams, but to a friendship that transcended generations. In the midst of uncertainty, they had found solace in each other, proving that kindness has a way of coming back tenfold. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and watch this next story. It's really emotional.